Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. We're going to wait for a few more people to join us, and then we'll kick off and get started.
Okay.
Hi, Maggie. Miss Julie. We have one of our Jackson peeps on.
Great.
Oh. All right, I'll go ahead and kick us off. So, hello, everyone. Welcome to week 4 of our Confronting Racism with the Bible. You are in for a very special treat tonight as we have our guest, Phil Reed, joining us. I met Phil a few years ago while leading our mission trips to Jackson, Mississippi, working with Dr. Perkins and the Perkins Foundation. And each year that Phil and his wife, Marcia, will come and speak to the teams, they've always left us challenged and encouraged. So I am super excited for you all to hear him tonight, hear him share his story and give us perspective, just biblical and kingdom perspective. So I'll go ahead and share a little bit of a background about Phil and share with you all his bio, and then we will go from there.
Good.
So Phil Reed formerly served as the president and CEO of Voice of Calvary Ministries in Jackson, Mississippi from 1999 to 2007, and again from 2009 to 2019. Phil came to Jackson from his home state of Indiana in 1975 to work as a volunteer with Voice of Calvary. He was the founding pastor of Voice of Calvary Fellowship, the first intentionally interracial church in Jackson. Phil and 3 African-American pastors founded an informal partnership called the Fellowship of Hope in 1982, which still meets monthly as an interracial, intergenerational group to support each other and do more of what God is calling each of the members to do individually. Phil met his future wife, Marcia, in 1976 when she also came to volunteer with Voice of Calvary. Phil and Marcia have been dedicated for over 40 years to the spiritual, economic, physical, and social well-being of the people of Jackson, especially West Jackson. And tonight, he's going to be speaking on race in the Bible, specifically focusing on kingdom diversity. So welcome, Phil. So glad to have you with us. Is there anything else you'd like to share with the audience about who you are before we get started?
Yeah, well, thank you, Wendy. I'm excited and honored to be here for real. Yeah, I met Christ here in Jackson, so that's why I'm here. I came to stay for 4 months, and 45 years later, I'm still here and still enjoy what I get to do. I was telling Wendy that we had a meeting actually this morning of the Fellowship of Hope. Some of those pastors I've known for 40 years, and we're talking about, some of you may know Mississippi just a month ago changed our state flag. We're the last state in the union to have the Confederate battle flag on our state flag, and was privileged to be part of that. But we're talking about what do we do next since we've gotten the flag out of the way. What do we do next? And so I got to meet with those guys and some younger people, and we're truly intergenerational. And so yeah, I get to do these same stuff I've been doing for 45 years. So I don't know very many people been doing the same thing for 45 years and still excited about what they get to do every day. So I would wish that for all of you young people. And I told Wendy my role now is getting behind young people like Wendy and some other people to see how I can help do what God's leading you to do. And again, I'm I'm who I am today because of Jesus Christ first, and my family, my wife, Marcia, and John, and May Perkins, and all the people here. So I owe my life to the community, African American community, particularly in Jackson. So that's why I'm still here and still excited.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
You have been committed. 45 years is a long time. What a blessing. So I see some more people are jumping in. As you're jumping in, feel free to type your questions in the chat throughout the night as Phil shares with us, and we'll get to those at the end. But Phil, I'll go ahead and turn it over back to you and ask you to share your story with us and start us off with answering the question of what does the Bible tell us about diversity?
Okay, so then I came here in 1975 and met the Lord here and became pastor of our church. I was raised in a Christian home, so I knew something about the Bible, but I hadn't really given my life to Christ. I was just 2 years out of addiction. Alcohol was my brother's choice, and I gave myself fully to it, and surprised that I'm still alive. God protected me more than once. And so I gave my life to Christ here and just never wanted to leave. And so, I'm excited about this series you all do, and I watched I watched all three of the previous uh, uh, episodes, at least some of it, and I was interested. Joel, the first night, said, it's getting cray-cray out there, and I did some research into why it's getting cray-cray out there, and there was a guy who's written a book. His name is Jaron Lanier. That he wrote a book called 10 Arguments for Deleting Your Social Media Account Right Now. The guy who was one of the pioneers of virtual reality, still works for Microsoft. So he's a computer nerd himself. And one of the things he talks about is how the whole web is geared on using algorithms. I'm a mathematician, so I know a little bit about algorithms. But the way algorithms work is the whole thing with the web, you want to get people to follow your page, and so it measures intensity, and hatred and bitterness and anger get more intensity than the softer emotions like love and compassion. And so that's why it's cray-cray out there, because he says, you get, that's why we have elections that are crazy. That's why we have all this crazy stuff out there, because it gets more activity. And so it is getting cray-cray out there. I don't think people are going to get rid of their social media account anytime soon, but we need to know what's going on. So I think he's right. It's cray-cray out there. I think we're more divided now than we've ever been in my understanding. And the second week, Dr. Richardson talked about how the church really hasn't done what it's supposed to do. And that's been going on for a long time. When Dr. King wrote a letter from the Birmingham jail, he said, I'm meeting young people every day whose opinion of the church has grown to outright disgust because the church stands for the status quo. So that's been going on since 1957 and before that. So it's not new days, it's new challenges. But Joel said, we're not here to change you in order to love you. We love you anyway. And what we want to do is have some dialogue and empathy and compassion. So I'm excited about that. I affirm that. I think that's exactly the right thing to do is let's reason together. Jesus said, you'll know the truth and the truth will set you free. So I'm not afraid of the truth. I'm finding more truth every day. I'm not trying to win an argument. I just want to know the truth. And so the whole thing about Bible, what does Bible say about diversity is is something, of course, I've been studying for 40 years because when we started Boys Calvary's Fellowship, we were predominantly African American. We had a good mixture of black and white, but we were predominantly African American. West Jackson's a predominantly African American community. Of course, you probably noticed I'm not African American. I'm white, and so I had a big learning curve. One thing that Dr. King said in his last book, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos, our community. He said one of the problems with white people is they think they have so little to learn, and
Mm.
so he really gave me a talking to after we had what was called the racial reconciliation meetings in 1983 that I'll talk a little bit about. But he said white people really need to re-educate themselves, and so I took that on as an assignment, and so I started studying Black history, uh, things I never knew. I found out things I never knew. I started reading about Black diversity in the Bible, and uh, and so I've been privileged to learn a lot. There's a lot in there. I'll get into some conclusions I've reached that are pretty radical. I think it's radical for me, and but I think it's based on solid research. I'm not. I don't have a agenda other than wanting to know the truth. So I guess that's an introduction. Uh, you want to get into diversity in the Bible? Is that right?
Yes, go for
Okay.
it.
So, well, I always believe in. I'm a mathematician, so I tell people that math is easy. I know those of you who don't believe that. It's simple. I won't say it's easy. It's simple. I'm able to teach math because I put my students at ease. I say math is simple. If you can add, subtract, multiply, and divide and count to 10, that's mathematics. Everything else is details. And so if you keep that in mind, it gives you a little bit of peace. But at the same time, if you forget how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide and count to 10, it doesn't matter how advanced you get in math, you're going to get the wrong answer.
Mm.
And in scripture, I think there's some similarities because there's some truths that are so basic. And if we keep those in mind, we're not going to go too far afield. But if we forget those truths, we're going to never get the right answer. So I always want to look at the end of the Bible in Revelation 7:9, and I think this is really one of the key passages that talks about diversity in the Bible, and it's Revelation 7:9. This is John looking up into heaven. And so listen to this. He says, after this, I looked, and there before me was a great multitude that no one could count, from every nation, tribe, people, and language, standing before the throne and in front of the Lamb. They were wearing white robes and were holding palm branches in their hands. And they cried out in a loud voice, salvation belongs to our God, who sits on the throne, and to the Lamb. And so John's looking up into heaven, and what does he see? He sees people still able to be identified as being from different tribes, different language, different nations, and the word for nation is ethnos, and different people. So I think it was Tony Evans that first put me onto this 25 years ago. He said, there's going to be ethnicity in heaven. There'll be ethnicity without any ethnocentrism. There'll be race without racism. But the race, ethnicity we are now will be in heaven. And I think he's right. He's not the only one to say that. But I believe in the physical resurrection of the body. So we're going to look like something. And I think we're going to have our ethnicity intact because it's part of who we are. So at the end times, we're going to have ethnicity. I believe that. So I don't think I hear some people say we need to just forget about race because we're all just the same, and in heaven we're just going to be lights and all angels and all be the same. I don't believe that. I think God is pleased with diversity. God is an artist. He likes different colors. So I think he's pleased with diversity. And so it's going to be in heaven. And And then Jesus prayed in his most famous prayer called the Lord's Prayer. He said, let it be on earth as it is in heaven. And so what we're supposed to strive for, I think, on this earth is not getting beyond our ethnicity, beyond our race, but we're supposed to embrace it and operate out of the strength of it and come together and affirm it. But we come together all saying salvation belongs not to your Lord, but not to my Lord, but to our Lord. And so diversity is going to be in heaven, and we're supposed to be able to do that beginning here on earth. And so that's what I'm about, is I'm about embracing uh, my whiteness. You know, I see people come here to Voice of Calvary white folks, and I did the same. We come here thinking we know everything, and then we start getting to know some black people, and we get excited about that. Then we go through this being confronted with our racism. We get almost ashamed to be white. And I've known people that never get beyond that, being ashamed to be white. There was a young lady in the news 3 or 4 years ago. I won't give her name because I don't. If you're going to say something critical, I don't believe in giving names. But she was in the news several years ago for she was a white woman but pretending to be black and was heading up an NAACP chapter, and she got busted. And so I know her. She used to live with my wife and I. So she has tried to become black. And I don't think that's what we're supposed to do. I'm not ashamed to be white. I'm ashamed sometimes of what white folks do, like with George Floyd. I was ashamed to be a white man. I was ashamed of the pain that white men cause. And so there's room for that, but I'm not ashamed to be a white man. That's the way God created me. I always say I've been white most of my life, and I'll be the rest of my life. So, and I'm going to be that in heaven. And so, but there'll be unity. There'll be no greater, lesser, but it's going to be with us. And so, God says, "Let it be on earth as it is in heaven." So, and you look at Acts 2, where it talks about the day of Pentecost, and it's a reflection of what we just read in Revelation. It says, "The day of Pentecost." Now, they were staying in Jerusalem, God-fearing Jews from every nation under heaven. When they heard the sound, a crowd came together in bewilderment, because each one heard them speaking in his own language. And then it says, there were Parthians, Medes, Elamites, residents of Mesopotamia, Judea, Cappadocia, Pontus, and Asia, Phrygia and Pamphylia, Egypt, the parts of Libya near Cyrene, visitors from Rome. And so in the day of Pentecost was Jesus kicking off the way it's going to be in heaven in the church. There were people from every nation and every people. And so God poured out his spirit without regard to race and ethnicity. So I think that's an overview of what diversity in the Bible is. We're supposed to celebrate our diversity.
Yeah.
So that's what we're striving to do here. And that's what I've been striving to do, is how do we celebrate the strong parts of our ethnicity and heritage? How do we deal with the bad parts of it? But how do we come together as a church? I think Dr. Perkins says more passionately than I do. I know you've been in on some of his calls, Wendy. But he says it's heresy to even talk about a black church and a white church. And I think he's right. I think it's okay to talk about a church that has a predominantly African American community, but I think he's right. We do need to be careful about talking about a black church and a white church with just one church. And it's to be made up of different people groups.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm about, is if it's going to be that way in heaven, I want to learn now. I want to learn how to do some of that here on earth.
Amen. Amen. So Phil, I know you alluded a little bit to your experience leading up, like what led up to the founding of the interracial church. I kind of wanted to hear, and I'm guessing like some of the things you're even sharing was like the epiphanies that you've had were with your experience being a white pastor. So what did those experiences teach you, and how that even changed your approach? And there's one particular story that you shared with our teams of, like, a member of the church kind of mentioned something to you, which led you down the trail of, like, okay, I need to do more research. So I wanted to hear a little bit about, how your mindset shifted a little bit based on your experiences at that church.
Yeah. So uh, our church was started in 1975, and we were officially started in January. I came in September that year, and and then we chose a pastor in 1976, and the church uh, actually chose me to be the pastor. John Perkins recommended it, and I didn't think I needed to be pastor, so I because we're prominent, and there was only about 15 of us at the time, so I'm not talking about a huge number. So, but primarily young African Americans. West Jackson, even that time, was 85% African American, and so I didn't think it was a good idea. So I only agreed to do it if we would have a black co-pastor. So we had a black co-pastor, and he only lasted about 6 months before he decided to leave, and then. And you can read all about this in Spencer Perkins and Chris Rice's book, More Than Equals. And Wendy will give you that book title. But they talk about these racial reconciliation meetings we had 6 years later, called in 1983, called the Racial Reconciliation Meetings. And it was called by some black members of our church that we had gotten larger. And so some black members of the church called some meetings to talk about some racial things that hadn't been dealt with. And so I went to the meetings thinking that um, certainly I was above suspicion because you all had asked me to be the pastor. So I went uh, to see how I could help out the congregation get over this. And so uh, I went to the meeting, and people said some very nice things about our church. It was run by our black members, and so they said some very nice things. But from the time I walked into the room, there always felt like there's another shoe getting ready to drop. And so the other shoe that got ready to drop was when that did drop was then some of our black members started telling about some of the things that they didn't like about our church. And not surprised, it turned to one lady said she was embarrassed to bring her friends to church because we have a white pastor. And of course, I'm sure my face registered some hurt. And another person said, "Your preaching is too white." And so I didn't know what that meant because I was thinking I was just preaching the pure word of God. I wasn't preaching white or black. And so at the end of that first meeting, I went to about an hour and a half of listening to complaints. And I said at the end, they asked me to comment. So I said, first words out of my mouth were, I guess, out of my hurt. I said, it just sounds like there's a lot of problems with my leadership, so maybe I should just resign. And if I'm the problem, of course, the members said, no, we don't want you to do that. We want you to stay, and we want you to be part of the solution. So I went home, talked to my wife, and prayed about it, and God reminded me of some of my commitments here. I was won to the Lord through a ministry of a Jackson State student, a young black brother at the time, a college student, and he led me to the Lord. And I said, he didn't see me as white, he just saw me as lost. And so when I accepted the Lord, part of my commitment was, for whatever time I have left on earth, I'm going to dedicate my life to helping the gospel cross racial barriers. So after that meeting, God reminded me of that commitment. He said, this is what you said. So first sign of trouble, you're going to run. And then about that same time, I picked up Dr. King's last book I already referenced, Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community? So, and he said, if we're going to continue the successes we've had with the civil rights movement, white people are going to have to re-educate themselves. So I said, let me see if my preaching's white. So I went back and found and looked at some of my old sermons, and I found out my preaching was white. And by that I mean my illustrations were all white.
Mm.
I didn't quote any black authors unless it was Dr. King or John Perkins. Uh, all of my all of my illustrations were white. My style was white. Uh, I was raised in a all white church. And it was an hour service. If you went to an hour and 5 minutes, you were treading on some dangerous ground. Nobody said anything. The sermons were very boring in some ways, and not a style. And so I decided to learn. I decided to learn how to not preach white, not so much style, although that was part of it, the content. And so I decided to start studying some Black history with the intent to having something relevant to say primarily to my African American members. And so what I discovered is how much I did not know about history. And so I started studying Black history. For example, um, we all know Thomas Edison invented the light bulb, but what I didn't know is Thomas Edison's light bulb had a cotton filament that only burnt for 5 minutes. It was Lewis Latimer, a black man, who invented the carbon filament that enabled the light bulb to work. He also set up the first electric company in New York. I didn't know that. I knew Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone, but when he had the first conversation on his telephone to his assistant, Mr. Watson, Mr. Watson was in the next room. So when he said, "Come here, Mr. Watson, I need to speak to you," all Mr. Watson had to do was walk around the corner. That was Alexander Graham Bell's telephone. It was Granville T. Woods that invented the telephone transmitter that enabled the telephone to be able to speak from house to house and city to city and from now all around the world. And I never knew that. I never knew that there was a guy in Chicago worked for the railroad who was a coal man. He shoveled the coal in, and one of the things and he also lubricated the engines. And but used to, you would have to shut down the engine to lubricate it, so the engine would be out of service all this time. Well, he invented an oil cup to go on the locomotive, so it revolutionized the whole railroad industry. And of course, as happens with everything, a lot of counterfeits came out that weren't as good as his. And so his name was Elijah McCoy. And so whenever a railroad, whoever made the locomotives, whenever they were advertising their locomotive, they had to assure people that this had Elijah McCoy's oil cup on it, not one of these counterfeits. And so they got in the habit of saying it has a real McCoy on it. And that's where the expression, the real McCoy, came from. I never knew that. My dad was a shoe cobbler besides working in a factory. And he had in his factory these shoe last machines. That's where he put the shoe on to repair it. And I never knew it was a black man named Jan Matzeliger that invented the shoe last machine. So I found all of these people in history that I didn't know about. I was raised thinking Admiral Perry was first man to the North Pole, only to find out that he wasn't. It was Matthew Henson that beat him there by 45 minutes. And so it was really Matthew Henson that was the first man to the North Pole. But through racism, and this was intentional, through racism, Admiral Peary had a problem with that. And so he took down Matthew Henson's flag and put his own flag up. And then 2 years later, when they were celebrating first man to the North Pole, it was Admiral Peary that got the accolades and not Matthew Henson. He got recognized finally by Ronald Reagan, but that was in 1987. So, all this stuff about Black history that I didn't know. And so I say that I started out, then this is what God does. I started out by studying Black history to have something to say relevant to Black brothers and sisters, and what I found was some of my own heroes of the faith.
Mm-hmm.
One of my favorite historical figures is a lady named Harriet Jacobs, who was a slave in North Carolina. She was raped, gave birth to 2 children by her master, and so um, she had 2 children, but she was being brutalized every day. So she was torn between escaping and not wanting to leave her children. So she and her grandmother, who was a retired slave, and her master gave her this little junky cabin to live in, live the rest of her life, and that was considered treating her well. But they hatched this plan that she would go up into this attic space and stay, and so she could stay. She faked her escape to New York, but she really went up in her grandmother's attic and lived up there. It was 7 feet long, 3 feet wide, 18 inches at the top, and it sloped down to nothing. And this is in North Carolina, where it gets hot. No insulation. So in the summer, it was sweltering heat. And she lived up there for 7 years. 7 years.
Uh-huh.
And and all that enabled her to do that, she said, was praying. And so I thought, wow, now that's a faith I don't know anything about. Jacob is my own. I don't tell her story to have something relevant to say to Wendy. I tell that story because she's a blessing to me. That's what I found with Black history is I found out what I didn't know, and so I've continued to expand that. And what I've come to realize now, the more I study, is uh, it's history itself is really how do I want to say it? Black history is important because that's what's been left out. But the danger of saying Black history, we can make it seem like it's a sideline to history. Like the normal thing is white history and Black history is a specialty study. What I've come to realize is that history itself started among people of color. And so history is by and large Black history. Just it's been rewritten. And so, I was sharing with Wendy that if you read in book of Genesis, the beginning of time, if we take that as a historical document, which I do, the Garden of Eden was in the Tigris-Euphrates River region. And then it talks about the Sihon and the Gishon River, Pihon and Gishon. We don't know where those were, but some people think that was the upper and lower Nile, which is in Egypt. Well, Egypt and even the Tigris-Euphrates River is now in Iraq, but that all used to be part of ancient Africa. So it's pretty clear to me that the Garden of Eden was what we consider Africa. I think it was people of color. And so civilization itself, history itself, started among people of color. And so I said this to Wendy, that one of the conclusions I've reached is I read a book, one of the books that made a big impact on me in the beginning is a book by actually Tony Evans, a man named William McKissic that wrote a book called Beyond Roots 2, Black Presence in the Bible. I think a couple other people have come out with books called Black Presence in the Bible. And so I think a harder book to write would be White Presence in the Bible. And I'm saying that as a white man because really white European history doesn't really enter into the picture of Bible until the New Testament, till Rome. And so history is by and large Black history, people of color. Obviously, the Hamites were I think pretty much everybody agrees that Noah's son Ham was a forerunner of African American, not African Americans, but Black people, Black presence. And they had the first civilization. Nimrod was a great warrior. He invented iron. So obviously one of the first great civilizations. It says very clearly in Scripture was Nimrod, who was a son of Ham. But here's the thing: I think Shem was a man of color. Uh,
Hmm.
so at least two of Noah's sons, I'm convinced, were men of color. Now Japheth, I think he might have been a man of color also. So I'm saying it's clear to me that at least Ham and Shem were people of color. What they looked like, I don't know, but I would believe they looked more like Wendy than they looked like me.
Hmm.
And so, um, you know, but we don't know that unless we study. And again, I am reading some books that are doing the homework. It's not, this is not sloppy. I'm not advocating sloppy history. I'm advocating doing your homework. And I got some books I recommended to Wendy, but I'm that's the conclusion I've reached, and I'm okay with that. You know,
Hmm.
I don't care what color Jesus was, but I know in Revelation it talks about him having hair like wool and feet
Hmm.
like bronze. Now, bronze is a brown metal, and so it says he had feet that look like bronze and woolly hair. What does that sound like to you? That sounds like a brother to me. So I'm saying I think Jesus was probably a man of color, and I'm not the only one saying that. I don't know what he looked like. It'd probably be better if we didn't even worry about his race, but since we do, since we have movies that that purport to portray Jesus Christ, I think we ought to at least get it right.
Yeah.
And so he probably looked more like um, Denzel Washington than he did Jim Caviezel. And so, uh, and even Moses probably looked more like Sidney Poitier than Charlton Heston. And I can say for sure Zipporah, who was Moses' wife, who was a Cushite, didn't look like Olivia de Havilland. And so, but that's the story we tell,
Yeah.
you know. And so I think we've gotten it wrong. And
Mm.
all I want to do is find the truth. And so these resources that I'm recommending are people who I'm happy because they all say, look, do your own homework. We
Yeah.
think this is based on solid historical investigation. Because Jesus said, if you know the truth will set you free.
Yeah.
But we don't have to worry about the truth. And again, I don't care what color Jesus was. I just want to be with him. Uh, I just, but I think he was probably a man of color. He
Hmm.
wasn't a white European. And so, um, I think that's the conclusion I've reached. And I think it's a message that I think that's a message that particularly somebody like me needs to tell because if it came from somebody who's African American, it could be almost like too much like this guy's on a soapbox trying to prove something that's unprovable. But
Hmm.
I think that the history is there. Um, and the ancient civilization going back to the Sumerian civilization uh, had a written language, one of the first written languages. Well, Sumeria was clearly in the African area, and so literature was clay tablets 6,500 years ago from Sumeria are in existence today. We can go look at that. If you look at the Sphinx in Egypt before the nose was broken off, uh, there's pictures of it, what it looked like before that, and it certainly had African features to it. So Egypt was primarily an African nation. And so, and that's where it looked to me like the Garden of Eden was located in that area. So I think it was people of color.
Yeah, that is so great. Thanks for just going down the line and mentioning some of those historical facts. I think they're very important. And it made me think when you mentioned a lot of those things for you, it was a stance of humility too, even with that member of your church. Like, at first you were like, oh, I was a little bit offended, but you were humble enough to like, actually, like, I'm going to take this to heart and do my research and look into just all of these different historical figures and what you discovered to kind of integrate and bring back into your church. And it made me think of this. One of the things that, I tends to be a little bit of a frustration for our Black brothers and sisters and people of color that sometimes our white brothers and sisters seems like they don't get it, even when they are trying, and also helping our white brothers and sisters to see that there is such a thing as a white culture that is inhibiting them from seeing things without bias. And even you doing that research, you were able to say like, wait a minute, looking at the Bible through a different lens. So I kind of wanted you to speak a little bit on that, because even culturally, you see that there's differences the way like our white brothers and sisters mourn, that's different than how we mourn. So there's a different mindset. So yeah, so if you can speak a little bit on that, of like some of the barriers that can keep us from stepping into each other's world and getting that understanding specifically for our white brothers and sisters.
Yeah. So, well, another thing that helped me was Jesus's parable about what do you do when you're blind. A blind man can't lead a blind man because both will fall into a pit. And then
Mm.
he says, here's the way you cure your blindness. First, take the log out of your own eye, and then you'll see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's or sister's eye. So he said, do two things. First of all, look at yourself as the one with the problem first, and then the one with the bigger problem. And so one of the problems white people have is, as Dr. King said, we think we have so little to learn. Because we think we got it. We can sit down. I can listen to you for an hour, hear your heart, and then I think I got it. Okay, I got it from here. Whereas, no, there's a whole lot to learn. I mean, I've been at this 45 years, and I'm still learning stuff,
Mm.
and I hope I learn forever. But so yeah, You talked about mourning differently. I smiled because when I came to Jackson and went to my first African American funeral in the white community, a funeral is like 25 minutes. So somebody in the white community, and it still happens today, somebody dies in the white community on Thursday, we're gonna put them in the ground Friday afternoon. We're gonna have a funeral, and it'll last 25 minutes, 30 minutes. We'll have an opening song, and somebody read a scripture, then another song, 15-minute eulogy, prayer, and we're done. My first funeral here in Jackson lasted 3 hours. First of all, the person died on a Thursday, and we buried him on Saturday. Not that Saturday 2 days, but Saturday a week. And so, because part of that was people had to come here from Chicago and Los Angeles and all around the country. And then it was a 3 hour service of mourning, of testimonies, of talking about this person. And so, yeah, I had to adjust to that. At first, it was difficult sitting through a 3 hour funeral as opposed to 30 minutes, but I come to appreciate it. I come to appreciate that kind of mourning, that kind of celebration, and so, celebration of life. And so that's one difference I saw. But the whole idea of family, and I learned this 6 weeks after my wife and I got married. We just bought a new house, and it just her and I, and a 3 bedroom, 1 bathroom house, and so there was a family here from Kenya that had moved here from Chicago, Wheaton College, and the husband was enrolled in Jackson State to work on his doctorate, and they had 2 children, a 4-year-old, a 3-year-old, and then while they were here, they gave wife Virginia gave birth to a baby, and then she died. The mother died a week later of a brain aneurysm. So here's the week-old baby, 4-year-old girl, 3-year-old son, and the husband, and they need a place to stay. So we at Boys of Cavalry back in those days, we used to do everything by consensus, and so I tell the story now, and people say, "What?" So we'd been married 6 weeks, and it was the elders' wisdom that this family should come and stay with my wife and I, and because we just had a new house. So we said, "Okay." I came home and told my wife that this is what the elders think, and I was an elder. She gave me that look of, "They want us to do what?" Uh, but uh, but we did. So we took in. So my wife was working as John Perkins' assistant at the time. So she quit her job and came home and to be a mother to a 4-year-old Kenyan girl, a 3-year-old boy, and a 1-week-old baby named Waithera, and then the husband David. And so they moved in with us. And after a few weeks, uh, I knew where Marcia fit in. She was the mother, and I knew where David fit in. He was the father. But I didn't know where I fit in because in America, even back then, uh, you can get in trouble messing with somebody else's children.
Mm.
So I didn't know what I was allowed to do. I didn't know what I was expected to do. So after a few weeks, we sat down with David, and I said, "Man, we need to talk." And I said, "I don't know what, I don't know where I fit. I don't know what you want me to do because they're your children, not mine. I know uh, people got problems with people disciplining their children." And so after I got done, David said, "I don't understand the problem." He said, "In my village, well, first of all, in Swahili, there's no word for uncle. Uh, In the father's brothers are all called dad.
Mm.
So he would be David Dad. In his village, he'd be David Dad. He'd be Dad David. I'd be Dad Phil." And he said, "In fact, in my culture, if you're a man in my village and you see my children doing something wrong and you don't discipline, that's an insult to me because that means that you don't care how my children turn out."
Mm.
So I learned better how to do family. So
Mm.
once we talked about that, that was good for me. I'm not sure it was so good for the children because it means they got a spanking from time to time for me. But I learned more about family, and I think the biblical viewpoint of family that the fathers, the men in the family have authority as a father, and so uh, several years 10 years ago or 15 years ago now, maybe, that baby that was a week old that stayed with us for first 6 months of her life was getting married. So she invited us to her wedding, and she asked my wife and I to walk her down the aisle as her parents, just like she did with her biological father. And so, I still get choked up when I think about that because to
Mm.
her, they moved out after she was 6 months old. So she didn't remember anything about us, but her father would tell her stories about her first parents who were white. So she kept our memory alive in that little girl's mind. So when she was 25 years old, ready to be married, it made sense to her to invite her first parents to her wedding. And so
Mm.
truly a better view of family than my white evangelical nuclear family. It's all about mother and father and children. Uh, and so I learned about family that's different. Uh, you know, in Jackson, family is different in the black community, the white community. Um,
Mm.
and my wife tells a story when she had that Kenyan baby, she'd go shopping and take the baby and the two little children be with her too. And she said people would look at her funny because remember this was back in 1978, and so only 2 years later, before that, the Ku Klux Klan was still handing out its literature on the street corner. So this is back in the days when uh, black folks and white folks weren't supposed to have a family together. So, and she said that the white lady would look at and stare at her, but would never say anything. But the African American women would come over and say, "Where'd you get those children? I know those aren't yours." And so they would engage her. And so, because they had a different understanding of family. And so to me, it improved my understanding of family. Uh, Family's still important. The nuclear family's still important, but there's another layer to it. It really does take a village to raise a child, not to supplant the parents, but to enhance the parents. And so that's that's part of what I've learned. And so I think it comes back to uh, white people need to know we don't know everything. And I'll say I had an advantage coming because I was raised in a family of 8 children. I'm the youngest out of 8 children. I had 6 older brothers and 1 sister. So I didn't know anything. I didn't know anything. I never had to say anything. So I have an uncle that said I was 12 years old before he even knew I could talk. You probably won't know that from this broadcast because I'm doing so much talking. But all that to say, I was raised with an inferiority complex. And so when I came here, one of the things Spencer Perkins said he liked about me uh, right off the bat is I didn't act like I knew everything. Well, that's because I didn't think I knew anything. So when I was in a room with those black brothers and sisters, I wasn't pretending they were as smart as I am, smarter than I am. I really assumed they were smarter than I am. And I used to hate that about myself. I used to think that was a personality flaw, and it can be. But because of that, God used that for me to come in and not act like I know everything. Because again, I was raised in a family where they always told me I didn't know anything, and so I assume I didn't know anything. So when I'm in a room with a bunch of black pastors, I don't have to be the one talking. That's just the way I grew up. I assume people around the table know as much as I do, and that's one of the hard things to get people who are used to being in control to do. And even in interracial multi-ethnic churches, I know I'm gonna have to be careful here with Greenhouse Church, but even with multi-ethnic churches, um, they're most of the time led by a white person. Uh, and one of my African American good friends, Ronnie Crudup Jr., Senior Bishop Crudup, I'm a member of his church now. We were having a Fellowship of Hope meeting, and he got very upset at one point. He said, "Here's a problem with multi-ethnic churches." He says, "My people will come and join your church, looking at the white pastor, but white people won't come and join my church unless you're feeling free." And so even in the midst of multi, and again, I know I'm not trying to step on any toes, but I just know in Jackson, there's only one multi-ethnic church that has a black pastor, and even that was started by white folks who hired a black pastor. So there's just this sense of uh, not just in white folks, but if you tell people long enough that they're not your ice is colder, sooner or later they begin to believe it too. So black people will join a multi-ethnic church pastored by a white person, uh, whereas white folks aren't going to join most of them aren't going to join a multi-ethnic church pastored by a black person. That's changing some, Albert Tate in California, but that's still one of those vestiges of we need to look at that. We need to ask why sense.
Yeah. That's great, Phil. So much goodness. I'm looking at the chat. People are saying, that's good. Just responding to all of the wisdom nuggets that you were dropping. Something that you just mentioned of being around the table. And that was one thing that you mentioned during one of the trips that was just a great takeaway. The importance of staying around the table, like when those conversations get hard and uncomfortable and trying to navigate through all of those things, and they will get hard, they will get uncomfortable, that we have to stay at the table long enough to see change. And I'm gonna shift a little bit and ask you, so what are some of the necessary tools that you would say are needed to have diversity, and what is the church's role when it comes to that? How does that look? And the importance of the church making sure that, yeah, with diversity, we are incorporating those tools.
Yeah, so I tell the story about, I feel like some of the most important things I've learned from my family. So I tell a story about having taken my children to Disney World. Uh, we were going to speak at a church in Florida, and they paid our way, so we were able to work a trip into Disney World. And so my youngest daughter, was 10 years old at the time, and we went into this hamburger restaurant there, and this is back in the day when they had the menu hanging on the wall and in front of you, lit up with 6-inch letters, and all the menu was in front of you. So I asked my children what they wanted. My son and my older daughter had ordered, and I asked my younger daughter, Kristen, what she would like, and she said, "I don't know, Dad. What do they have?" And I said, "Kristen, the sign's right up there. Just tell me what you want." So I waited a minute and asked her again what she'd like, and she said, "I don't know, Dad. What do they have?" And I said, "Kristen, the menu's right up there. Just tell me what you want. Anything you want." So I waited another minute and asked her a third time, "What would you like?" And she said, "I don't know, Dad. What do they have?" Well, by that time, I'm getting irritated. I'm assuming that the girl's just stubborn. And so I said, "Kristen, I know you can read. You're getting ready to go into the 5th grade. I know you can read. It's right up there. What would you like?" And I can still remember it. Her lips started quivering, tears running down her eyes. And she said, "Dad, I can't see the menu."
Mm.
I was like, "What? You can't see that big menu up there?" And so I went, and so the 4 things happened to me immediately that really are the 4 ingredients I think we need to continue this discussion of race. And the first thing is I went from being mad at what I thought was a stubborn girl to responding out of love to my daughter who couldn't see. And so all that anger went away, and I said, my daughter couldn't see. And then the second thing is I apologized to her. I felt like a failure as a dad. My daughter's getting ready to go into the 5th grade, and I don't know she can't see. She's that nearsighted. She could not see that big sign up there. And so I owned the problem. That's
Mm.
the second step is it's up to each of us to own the problem. That's what Jesus talked about. Take the log out of your own eye first. And then the third thing that happened is we didn't have any money at the time. I was working for Boys of Calvary. The only way we were able to go to Disney World in the first place is because the church paid our expenses and gave us an honorarium. So we didn't have much money. But when we got home, we found a way to buy that girl some glasses. So the third thing is you commitment to solving the problem no matter the cost.
Mm.
And then the fourth thing, and this really does have to be fourth, is I asked my daughter, so what do they do for you in school? How can you be in the 5th grade and you can't see any better than that? And they never told us. And she said, well, the teacher will let us will always put me in the front row. And then when she writes something on the board, she'll let me get up out of my chair and go stand next to the board and copy it down. I
Mm.
started getting mad at the system that instead of telling me, her dad, your daughter has a sight problem, they just accommodated to her nearsightedness.
Mm.
And so that comes back to uh, being a little bit mad at the church and seminaries for not teaching any better than we are on race and black people in the Bible and all this. But again, that's not where you start. And I think unfortunately, sometimes in all that's going on now, that's where we want to start. We want to start with the system. But first of all, I think we got to respond in love, take ownership of the problem, help solve the problem, and then we can confront the system.
Mm.
So, again, Jesus said, take the log out of your own eye. So own the problem. But then it does say, you got to take the speck out of your brother's eye. And so, what's in your eye might just be a speck, but it can still blind you. And
Mm.
so your brother, I got to be brave enough to speak up to the speck I see in your eye. And that's where the especially now, you can get in trouble saying the wrong thing right now. Especially as I can tell you from painful experience, as a white brother, there's some things I can't say. At a meeting of the Fellowship of Hope again, and two meetings ago, I shared something, and one of my black brothers that I've known for 40 years warned me about saying that. It was a comment that it wasn't racist. It was comments about trying to be bipartisan, and he warned me about you need to be careful saying that. Please don't say that outside this room. I don't want to see you have a Drew Brees moment. And so, but I think I got to be strong enough to speak up anyway. So even getting beyond the fear, but that's only after I've acknowledged my part of the problem. And so what we want to do is we want to go directly to your problem. And we flipped it upside down. I look at my problems as small and your problems as a major moral failure. Said flip that upside down. Assume you got this bigger problem and your brother or sister may have a problem, but it's smaller, but it still is dangerous because a speck can blind you. I got a speck of sawdust in my eye one time and ended up having to wear a patch over my eye. A speck can blind you, but we don't want to have these conversations where we're afraid to share something that might get us in trouble. And I think we've got to trust the relationship enough to do that. And that's even harder to me than admitting my own failure. Hey, if it'll get us moving forward, I'll admit being at fault. I'll say blame me. But I'm a little more reluctant sometimes to share with my black brothers and sisters some things that I see that may just be specks, but it can blind you. And I said this to Wendy earlier. I think one of the divisions we're having now that at least is hard to deal with is racial division, is the whole political division. You got liberal, conservative, Democrat, Republican, and we can't talk to each other. And so I think there's plenty of hypocrisy and lying and criticism to go on both sides. But to have a bipartisan agreement or a nonpartisan discussion is tough. But it's one of the things I'm most proud of the Fellowship of Hope, because not only are we intentionally interracial, we have liberals and conservatives. I have a couple guys that would be to the right of Rush Limbaugh, and then we have a couple guys who are card-carrying members of the ACLU, and we meet every month and we talk about issues, and it's amazing the things we can agree on after a while if you just stay around the table. So, but it all has to be based on love, and that's why I like what Joel the first night said. We're not trying to change your mind in order to love you. We're going to love you anyway. So love is the main thing. But what if we saw people, instead of being stubborn, we just saw them as they got a sight problem. And I need to help you see. First of all, I need to make sure I see more clearly. Then I can see clearly to take the speck out of your eye. But then we do have to confront some of those systemic issues. I'll tell this story. In seminary, one of the books we had to read was The City of God by St. Augustine or St. Augustine. Well, I never knew St. Augustine was black. St. Augustine was a bishop in North Africa. I never knew he was black. How come I didn't know that? And so a gentleman named Thomas Oden wrote a book about the African roots of Christianity. And he says, if you trace Christianity's growth, it went, instead of going from North Europe down to Africa, it really went from Africa up north, because you remember Christians in the book of Acts were driven out of Jerusalem. And one of the first converts was by Philip, who converted an Ethiopian. So tracing that history, after they got driven out of Jerusalem and out of that and out of Rome, they it probably went down to Africa, and where for the next 200 to 300 years it grew. And so when Constantine became a Christian in the 3rd century A.D. and Rome became a Christian nation supposedly, then it went from Africa up north. Uh, and so I never learned any of that in seminary. And so yeah, I get a little upset at seminary not dealing with that short-sightedness, that nearsightedness, and just accommodate to it. But you got to deal with the system after you've dealt with the first three, I think.
That's great. That's great. And I know we have a few people listening. Please be sure if you have any questions for Phil to put those in the chat. We'll get to them in a little bit. And Phil, just one of the points that you make with doing it in love. Recently, I was on a Zoom call and someone gave the example of the importance of celebrating the small moments and gave this illustration of a child that's learning to walk. You'll see that parents will kind of cheer their child on, like, oh, you took one step, or you took another step, like how exciting. And I think a lot of times, for us, like waiting for someone to fully get onto the other side, and you don't see parents waiting for the child to fully walk for them to cheer the child on. And that was just an encouragement to me, and your thought just made me think of that, of like the grace and love, like, yes, like bringing up those things, but also celebrating those small moments when they happen as well.
Yeah.
I guess the next thing I would have for you, having walked a little bit of this journey and where we are at now, what would kind of be like your charge? Like, how do we get to, that place of hope? That you're mentioning, of like walking out just love and learning a little bit more. So I want you to talk a little bit about that. But right before it, actually, I have one more question.
Okay.
Another frustration that I've been hearing a lot from our Black brothers and sisters is just the difference between even assimilation versus integration. When it comes to diversity, it seems that, or racial reconciliation as well, there seems to be more of a want of assimilation from the majority culture instead of integration, or Black brothers and sisters feeling the pressure to conform into the majority culture at the cost of diversity. So I want you to touch on that before we go to the last part on moving to hope.
Yeah, so I think that, and I think that's why the passage in Revelation is so powerful, because here we are in heaven around the throne, complete with our ethnicity and our race intact, except there's no racism. So the sin's been siphoned out of it, and so, but we still embrace that culture. We still embrace our race and our ethnicity. So it's not about assimilation. It's not about people giving up their race, but coming into the strength of it. And so, yeah, I think that I'm not trying to get people to give up their race or racial identity. To me, the essence of racial reconciliation is two ideas. Integration was more. We had this wall between the Black community and white community. And integration is, we'll cut a door in the wall and we'll let a few people through as long as they act right, and which means particularly act white. And so, yeah, assimilate to our way of doing it. But racial reconciliation is where two people come together from different ethnicities. They come to the strength of their culture. They come to it intact, and both of them become better for it. So when I listened to my members back in 1983 saying my preaching was too white, I took that as not only a content but a style issue, and so I started listening to black preachers like E.V. Hill and Gardner C. Taylor, who was one of the chosen by Time Magazine as one of the 5 best preachers of all time, black brothers. I started listening to some local people like John Perkins and Ronnie Crudup and others, and started listening to their style. And I never became a black preacher, obviously, but I did become a better preacher. And so um, that's racial reconciliation. It's not you giving up being black, me giving up being white. But it's we both embrace our culture. We challenge each other around the things that might need to be changed, but we both become better for it. That's the idea. I think an illustration God gave me several years ago is the difference between singing in unity and singing in harmony. Unison is everybody singing the same note at the same time, and it's good, but it's not as good as harmony. One of my favorite songs, because I'm an old hippie, was from Judy Collins, who has a recording of Amazing Grace. Collins, for those of you who don't know, is a white hippie back in the 60s and wasn't a Christian. But she recorded this version of Amazing Grace. You should download it. There comes a time in there that she starts the 3rd verse, everybody's singing in unison. And it's good, but then about halfway through that verse, all of a sudden, instead of singing in unison, they start singing in harmony, where you have 4 parts. And it goes from being like this to suddenly it becomes like this. It becomes more full. Also, William McDowell has a version of "Here I Am to Worship," and he does the same thing. It starts off everybody singing in unison. Again, it's okay, but then there comes a point when he says, "Okay, one more time," and then the choir breaks into harmony, and I just get tears in my eyes every time, because that's what we're supposed to do, not sing in unison, where we're all singing the same verse the same way, but we're singing in harmony. We're singing different parts, but we're singing from the same sheet of music. So we're all talking about the kingdom of God, but I'm singing my part I learned, my white part. You're singing your African American part. Someone else is singing their Latino part, but we're singing this full sound of harmony, not unity, or unison. So I'm more for harmony than I am for unison. I don't think we should all be the same. I think we should sing the different parts God's given us, but we should be singing from the same sheet of music. We can't be putting race above Jesus Christ. So we got to be singing the gospel. But man, I want to sing in harmony, and so I think absolutely we don't want to assimilate. And then as an old person, God showed me this verse out of Psalm 71, verse 18 years ago. It's David. He says, "Even when I'm old and gray, do not forsake me, O Lord, till I declare your power to the next generation, your might to all who are to come." And so my position as an older person is to invest in younger people like Wendy and Jason Abrams and Ronnie Crudup Jr. and get behind you all and let you do what God's leading you to do your way. Because one of the problems that people my age, we want you all young people to sit down, I'm going to tell you how to do it. Well, no, it needs to be two-way communication. I think I have some things to share because I've been at it 45 years. So I've learned to run a marathon, and life is a marathon. So I think I got some things to share, but I want you to do it your way and not my way. So, I go to, there's a church that got started out of our church called Common Ground, and it's primarily young people. They grew up in the church I was pastor of. I don't particularly like the music. It's not my style of music, but they're not doing it for me. They're doing it the way they want to do it, and that's, man, it's hard for people that are older to be able to let go and have two-way communication. There's a book written by a gentleman named uh, his last name's Kinnaman. I'll send the link to Wendy, but it's called Faith for Exiles. It's how to reach young people, and it's a study of 18 to 29-year-olds that grew up in the church, and it has some bad news and some good news. The bad news is that 90% of young people that age that grew up in the church are abandoning the church, but 10% are what he calls resilient Christians, and he refers to a resilient Christian as a Christian who grows not in spite of adversity, but because of it. So they want to hear, what's the cost? What's this going to cost me? Tell me the real story. Don't sugarcoat it. So on one hand, they say we can look at that negatively, like we're losing 90%. But on the positive side, 10% of young people who grew up in the church is 4 million to 5 million young people who are inspired by things being hard. And so I think we're in good hands. I think we got a lot to build on. 4 to 5 million young people. Wow, if we can't do something with that after what Jesus did with 12 disciples. So I want to invest in young people, resilient Christians. Tell the true story. I think one of the reasons that the church has been infected, we've gotten too soft. Jesus said, on this rock I'll build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. He said the church is supposed to go into those places where it looks like hell, and we're supposed to take over. But we've gotten too comfortable. We've made it seem like the church is supposed to make me comfortable. It's supposed to make me wealthy and prosperous, and that's not the church. And so these resilient Christians, they get that. They want to be told, what's it going to cost me? Even if it's going to cost me my life, I want to know that. And so I am excited about the future, about 4 to 5 million young people. And I'm assuming most of the people on this call, if you're younger, are probably in that resilient Christian number. That you want to know the tough things. You know it's tough out there, but you think the church has an answer to it, as I do. So I say more power to you, and I want to get behind you and help any way I can. And that's what I've learned over 45 years. The communication has to be two-way. I have to listen, and I have to share what I have to share. But that's what gets me out of bed and makes me excited to be able to do things like this.
That's great. Thank you for that, Phil. We got one question that came in, and then we'll wrap up in about a few minutes or so. Maggie said, I have heard several people use that phrase, quote, acting white, quote, but I have not heard an explanation of what this means. What is someone doing when they're acting white? So the phrase, quote unquote, acting white, and then what is someone doing when they're acting white?
Well, I'll tell you what, I've heard it being used and I think it goes back to misunderstanding of history, but acting white, Ronnie Crudup Jr., who's the son of the pastor of Ronnie Crudup Sr. that I've known for 40 years, he said he grew up being told he was acting white. And what it meant by the kids would tease him because he'd do his homework, he used good grammar, he took school seriously, and that was acting white. Uh, and I think that's a problem. Of course, it's a problem because, again, and there's this assumption that white folks are the well-educated ones, and people of color are not very educated. And that just doesn't fit the historical context that I talked about earlier, because the first people to have a written language were the Sumerians, who were from that African basin. And so it's not true, and this is one of the myths, it's not true that in Africa all history was only oral. They had written history. In fact, uh, they had written history before Europeans did, and so it's a problem. But if we keep telling that history, getting it wrong, it does seem like if you can get the assumption, if you're well educated, uh, you must be trying to act white. You must be trying to act European, uh, Caucasian, uh, and so that's what it means a lot of times. I don't know what the specific person meant. It could be. I think it might be that, but again, I think the way to overcome that is not to get uh, African American children to stop doing their homework and stop getting good grades, but to tell history right. That it doesn't. You're not acting white. You're living up to the history of your people, and that's and I think that's part of what's going to free us up once we get history right. Uh, in 1933, Carter G. Woodson wrote a book called The Miseducation of the Negro, and he talked about that thing. If you tell people long enough that they haven't been educated, that if you get education, that's acting white, then pretty soon you will develop an inferiority complex. So you won't have to tell them anymore to go stand in the back of the room or to go sit in the back of the bus. They'll go there automatically because they think that's where they belong. And so he wrote this book talk about the miseducation of the Negro, and he goes into some of the things that we talked about today. And so that's why that's why he started Black History Week, and then it's grown into Black History Month. And so I think one of the things I'd like to write someday is the miseducation of the Caucasian, because we've been miseducated too. Um, but that's my answer to that question.
Yeah. Great, great. So we can hear you speak all night, at least for me. And you're such a great teacher and storyteller. So to close us out, do you have just any final thoughts, and going back to what I mentioned earlier of like having walked this, mentioned being in ministry for 45 years, and yeah, just a last charge of like getting to that place of hope and walking this out. Yeah, so just any final thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, you mentioned something I think is very important. Dr. King mentions it in his last book, Where Do We Go From Here? You said, don't forget to celebrate the small victories. He makes that point. The work is never going to be done. There's always going to be race and ethnicity to deal with this side of heaven. But we can't just get overwhelmed with the work there is to do yet. We got to celebrate the victories. And so he talked about the very thing you said, celebrate the small victories. And so we got to do that. But on the other hand, and this is what white folks want to do, he says in that book that the problem with white folks and black folks, they use language differently. When black folks talk about equality, they mean this. They mean on the same level. When white folks talk about equality, they mean some improvement has been made. So you can sit in the front of the bus now. What more do you want? You can sit at the same lunch counter. When are you going to be satisfied? Or here in Mississippi, we changed our state flag. We got rid of the old flag to get rid of the Confederate symbol. So we're celebrating that victory. But we'll fool ourselves if we think it's going to solve anything. It's not going to solve any issues of poverty. It's not going to solve any of the historic issues of racism. So while we celebrate the victory, we have to know there's a lot of work ahead of us. And so you gotta understand the work is going to be ongoing, but don't forget to celebrate, but don't forget to understand that we got to keep doing this. And that's what I've learned. You got to keep pedaling. Several years ago I started a bike ride where I rode my age every year. First year I was 62 years old, So I did this 62-mile bike ride, and then I did 63 all the way up to 69 years old. And people would ask me, Phil, how do you ride a bike for 62 miles? And the answer is really simple: keep pedaling. Don't stop pedaling. And same thing, man. We can't stop pedaling. We can't. We gotta take a rest, but and celebrate. So I took water break, but you got to get back on the bike and keep pedaling. And so, again, I think my encouragement is I truly am encouraged by Wendy. I think Wendy's one of the coolest people I know, doing some great things at Greenhouse Church. And she knows Smiley Abrams, who was 1 year old when his family joined my church, and he's leading. He's a regional director now for InterVarsity. We are in good hands. If we got 4 million to 5 million resilient Christians between the ages of 18 and 29, I think we're in good hands, and we got a lot to build on. But it's up to me to get behind you, and because you're the ones that are going to take it into the next phase. So I'm excited. I'm excited about Greenhouse Church, and I'm excited about this call and what you all are doing.
Yeah. Thank you for people like you who have paved the way and made some groundwork for us to continue in this journey, in this fight. Maggie responded and she said that your answer to acting white was very helpful. So thank you for that. And for those of you who have been listening, or if someone goes back and listens to this, all of the books that Phil referenced are in the description box of this video, so you can find them there and go ahead and do your own research. So thank you again, Phil, for joining us and just sharing your valuable insight and giving us kingdom perspective. And I see in the chat that this was very helpful for people. And yeah, we're just super, super thankful for you joining us tonight. And for everyone who tuned in, we will have more guest speakers in the next couple weeks. So be sure to join us again next Thursday at 7 p.m. So have a great night. Let's keep pedaling.
Thank you. Good night.